crosswalk sign. This would be the general location where that signage will be relocated here, along with the sign that's kind of seen in the trees there. The footage is not the greatest, but you can see that that will be placed on the side for southbound travelers. Here again, you can see the existing conditions. And this next portion of the staff report, you'll see that we've created the basis for why we believe that the municipal code gives us the discretion to underground the radios, and we've provided again a condition of approval to require that. We've also provided some photographs in the vicinity where you can see that undergrounding has occurred, not necessarily by Verizon at this point, but you can certainly see that underground vaulting is a commonplace practice throughout the city within the public right-of-way. We have made the recommendation, and the applicant has agreed again. This is a close-up of the signage on the pole to the south of the proposed location of the streetlight. Again, this is the, we have provided an analysis of the human exposure to RF, and our consultant will be able to talk about that and answer any particular questions. The take-home from a staff perspective is that the Hammett and Edison reports have been confirmed by our consultant that you're at or below less than 3% for any type of RF exposure to the public at these locations at ground level and also above. We've provided in our conclusion several conditions of approval that are contained in the resolution, and staff recommends that your commission approve the resolution as we've provided the findings and conditions. And this concludes staff's report.
Thank you, David. Questions of staff?
Could you tell me, in terms of the actual luminaire, the street light, the Cobra head, the light that's being proposed, is that at the same height as existing Cobra heads throughout the city?
In looking at them, I believe the answer is no, at least for those that are along Napa Street. I think those are a lot taller. Those are a lot taller than this one that's being proposed. I wasn't able to confirm the height of those. We have, if I may talk on that just a moment, we have in our condition that the location of the service disconnect and the method of illumination, the level of illumination and the style of the Cobra head will be to the satisfaction of the Public Works Director or city staff.
Thank you.
I have a question for Mr. Abachi, and it's something that we spoke about briefly beforehand, but I wanted to, for the benefit of folks in the audience, to just address this point. We had a letter sent to us by Carol Marcus, which refers to SMC 5.32.060 and goes on to cite language indicating that it is the burden of Verizon to prove the clear need for any cell tower and the applied for and the infeasibility of co-locating it elsewhere. And could you let us know whether that code section applies to the permits applied for tonight?
It does not. That code section is for facilities and applications within the residential districts. This application and the next two are all for applications within the commercial districts, and there is a different section for commercial districts in Chapter 5.32, which merely requires a use permit.
And does not require showing to get that permit of any necessity or need?
Correct. That language is not in the commercial district section.
Thank you.
Also some questions about some of the correspondence, Mr. Abachi. I'm assuming you have reviewed the letter from McKenzie and Albritton.
I have.
All right, so with regard to some of the major points they make in there, I'd like to hear your opinion. One was that they believe that the staff recommendation to place the radio underground is based on two inapplicable code sections. That's their first reference, so maybe we'll go through these. Would you like me to just highlight the ones, or should we go through them one at a time?
I think the applicant is here, and they certainly can provide their reasoning and their position.
Yes.
As I read the letter, it states that the ordinance in chapter 5.32 is essentially outdated, and that undergrounding condition is not appropriate for a small cell facility as opposed to a telecommunications tower. What we have done with chapter 5.32 is we've taken the findings and the requirements, because that was the chapter that was in place when they made the application, and we have adapted it as much as we can to the new and evolving law, which we talked about several times previously with the FCC order. And we have taken those provisions that we can from the FCC order and applied them with chapter 5.32. As to the undergrounding condition, the language of the FCC order is in the staff report, is planning director's recommendation for undergrounding. It is a case of first impression because the FCC order is so new. As far as a section that states that undergrounding must be done if it is possible, I would read that as being if it is feasible and without there being any practical constraints upon that undergrounding. And that would be, if it were to become a point of contention, then that would be something that would, be decided at a later time. But we've done what we can with the law that is in place, with the FCC order. That's the language. It's not entirely clear how to be applied. So where our ordinance says, if possible, we should read if feasible and if there are no practical constraints. And I think that would be consistent with the other terms of the municipal code stated in the staff report.
Okay, so in summation, do you believe that the position that staff and potentially the commission is taking with regard to undergrounding is, in your opinion, legally defensible?
I think that it would be a case of first impression for the courts. And because the law is so new, I would not have enough authority to draw from in order to provide you a legal opinion as to whether or not such an undergrounding condition would survive a challenge.
Okay. And then, in addition, there is a section on page 3, and talking about compliance, and they say the phrase, the city, county, state of California, in terms of frequency and exposure standards, should be deleted. What's your opinion on that?
I believe that would be acceptable. And while we are discussing the letter, I did have a correspondence with Verizon's counsel, who is here today. And we think that there's some language we can come up with to substitute for the specific conditions in the agreement that are listed in the letter. So I think we can work through that language.
And would we then work through that language prior to the commission approval or denial of the application? I mean, we have to have.
We could do that
finalized.
tonight, yes.
Yeah, thank you.
Anyone else? Seeing no one, I will then open it up for the applicant to speak if you care to.
I think you want a different location for this. You have 12, we're on 7. 6.
6, 12, and then 7.
Good evening, Commissioners. Thank you. My name is Mark Peters. I'm with the CBR Group. We are the applicant representing Verizon. And I wanted to start by thanking David Storer and staff. Much of my presentation has already been touched on by David, so I'll try not to be redundant in that fashion. We have been at this for quite some time now. These applications started a couple of years ago. Our original designs were on wood utility poles, and as most of you know, we've been here many times, and we've talked about an awful lot of designs, and we feel like we've come to the best possible design that we've shown you, and that we think that you can find acceptable to approve tonight. Not only have we looked at designs, but we've looked at locations that there were some controversy over. We've relocated to less controversial locations, and we think that the location and the design is something that should be approvable by you. The letter that was by McKinsey and Albritton that was provided touched on 2 points that we had objection to. I believe that the one point, as far as the encroachment agreement or the agreement, is something that we the attorneys have been able to come to some level of agreement on. I don't think it's an issue for us. We still do object to the condition of undergrounding. And previously within the staff report, we provided an analysis that does show the infeasibility and the impracticality of that undergrounding. And we can talk more at that length if you have questions, and we could refer back to those earlier submissions. Tonight, I'd really like to focus on the designs that we've come up with. Sonoma 6 is, as staff has mentioned, is near the U.S. Bank. It's a commercial area. It is quite some distance from residential, and we've worked very hard at finding a solution that is very minimalistic in design, that has the most shielding for it. The street sign, this is a little bit different view than David showed previously, where we would relocate the existing crosswalk sign onto our new proposed pole and to help shield the disconnect from view for traffic going southbound, which would be the primary view that the facility would probably be viewed by traffic. And I have a little bit of illustration of the equipment that we have proposed on the pole. 8 feet above the ground is the disconnect. This is necessary by PG&E. It's going to be no wider than the width of the pole, so the silhouette of the pole should primarily conceal it. And with the signage that's proposed, and I'd like to also say for all 3 designs, we are okay with whatever signage the Public Works Department deems appropriate. We have no vested interest in what sign goes over it, and we are happy to put signs to help conceal it. Above that, the radio is at 23 feet. This is the slimmest radio that currently Verizon uses at this power level. And then we have the smallest canister antenna that we're currently utilizing on top of the pole, which also conceals the PG&E wireless smart meter inside the shroud of the antenna. We'd like to reserve a little bit of time after public comment for any rebuttal or questions, and I'm available, and outside counsel is available here right now if you have questions of us.
Questions to the applicant? Seeing none, thank you.
Great, thank you. With the remaining time, I would like to invite up Bill Hammett with Hammett Edison to briefly talk about the emissions.
Good evening, Chairman, Commissioners. My name is Bill Hammett. I'm a registered professional engineer in California. I manage a firm of 20 located right here in Sonoma. A regular part of our practice is the calculation or the measurement of radio frequency exposure conditions. We do this work for carriers, we do this work for cities, we do this work for landlords. As engineers, our job is really simple. What are the exposure levels and how they compare to the standard? All of the levels have gone down slightly because the antennas have moved up slightly from the previous designs that were discussed at the last hearing here. The maximum at ground is 1.2% of the exposure limit. The maximum at any nearby building, assuming they were 2-story, which a lot of them are not, would be 2.8%. So there's no question that this will comply with the federal standards. Two facts that might be of interest with regard to the standards. One is that the IEEE standard, which is the most current one in the U.S., was just updated 2 months ago. It's the 2019 standard, based on all the studies that had been published and peer-reviewed and put in the international database from the previous 2005 standard. And over that 14-year period, all those new studies that have come in have not provided a basis for them to tighten the standard. So still based on the same basic restriction that the earlier standard was, which is why the FCC, which took action also last month, in updating its adoption of the standard, did not see fit to tighten the levels. Science has not proven, provided the information by which they would seek to tighten the standards. And I've got some quotes from the document. It's a very hefty document, as you can imagine. 1,500 studies specifically referenced in their analysis of how they came up with the standards and reissued them, reaffirmed them, as well as another 2,000 studies that they've got in their database online. So it's a very extensive report. So the new standard and the FCC's adoption. So again, there's no question, and Mr. Afflerbach has confirmed the findings in our reports. So there's no question that this facility, these 3 facilities, will comply with the FCC standards. I'm happy to go at greater length on any of those issues if you like, but
Just a quick question for clarification to the public. When you say 1.8 or 2.8%, you're talking about 1.8 or 2.8% of the maximum standard set by the FCC regulations. In other words, there's 100% out there, and what you're saying is that the radio frequency emissions from these particular radio towers would be at 1.8% of the maximum standard allowed? Is that what you're saying?
that's correct. 100% is the maximum allowed. These are at 1.8%. And that's the maximum at any particular location. Our modeling calculates what the exposure levels are every 1/10 of a meter for hundreds of feet around. And that's the maximum. So at most locations, it's going to be lower than that, many times lower, as you get further away from the facility.
Thank you.
Certainly.
Other questions?
And based on one of your other comments, it seems that the higher you put these, the lower the exposure at the ground level. Is that correct?
That's correct. There's a basic principle of physics called the inverse square law. So as you get further away from the facility, the power levels go down by the exponential rate. So these are, I think, 5 or so feet taller than the other ones, so it goes down exponentially as these go up.
And does raising the height of these affect their capability of transmitting radio frequencies for cell phone users?
The energy goes out in a fairly narrow pattern out toward the horizon, and it might reach a little bit further if these are taller. That's really a question for Verizon as to how they integrate these with their existing facilities.
Okay, thank you.
Go ahead.
An awkward question, but nonetheless something that has been on my mind. Not that long ago, there was an article that I believe was expressing the updated FCC findings, and it was published in the Wall Street Journal. And I was interested in reading it, and in so doing, by the time I completed it, there was another government agency that was kind of refuting what the FCC was saying, which makes it extremely awkward for me as a commissioner to figure out which federal department do I believe. Can you render any comment about the dilemma to that, or is that,
I'm happy to offer a comment on it.
Sure.
I'm not familiar with that particular article in the journal, so I'm at a loss for what the reference was. But if I may, the act of Congress, 1996, signed by Bill Clinton, said, FCC, you will adopt a standard, and that'll be the standard throughout the country. Nobody can adopt anything tighter. So as a matter of law, and you've got attorneys here, that is the standard that everybody references and cannot base a decision to deny on the health impacts so long as it meets that standard. And there's no question here that it meets that standard. I'm not aware that other agencies have refuted the FCC's adoption.
It was a national health, it was some other federal branch of something that raised the question, which left me very disappointed, because after reading it, you know, the left hand and the right hand were talking two different ways, and that's what I found very disappointing.
It could be NIOSH that did that.
It may have been.
Right, and they funded a program, I believe this was the NTP study that they were referencing,
Could very well be.
National Toxicology Program. They continue to study the effects of exposure to radio frequencies.
Okay.
And have for 70 years been studying this and continue to study it. Most of the research that goes on now relates to the exposure from the phone itself, which will be 1,000 times higher in terms of specific absorption rate than anything that you would get from any of these facilities.
Okay.
So vastly higher. The NTP study kind of started with this level and ramped up to even higher exposure levels. And they found there's some procedural issues, but they found that there was a slight increase in something in rats that were bred to be susceptible to those.
Okay.
So it's of interest, but it's fully considered in the new standards,
Thank you.
certainly.
Go ahead.
Just to follow up on that cell phone example real quick.
Microphone?
Just to follow up on that cell phone example real quick. When you talk about the radio frequency standard, the FCC standard, it's the same standard that applies to small cell towers as to cell phones, correct?
Correct.
There's a limit.
Actually, the standard, if I may, the
standard.
standard allows a 20 times relaxation for partial body exposures.
Okay.
So the phones are running at very close, if you keep the paper when you buy the phone, or if you buy one in Berkeley now, it has a requirement to say prominently on it what the specific absorption rate is. Typically, the limit is 1.6 watts per kilogram, and so they will be 1.5, 1.48. They will be very close to that limit. This is 20 times allowed, 20 times higher than anything that would be allowed from a plane wave source like one of these towers. So there's already a 20 times safety factor, a 20 times differential for these being higher in specific absorption rate. The fact that they're at 100% and we're at 1% for these facilities adds another 50 times safety factor there, another 100
Right.
times.
So when you see, there have been reports in the news over the past year that I believe the Chicago Tribune did an independent study on cell phones and found that they were all exceeding that FCC limit, whether it was relaxed or not. You're saying that cell phones that we all seem, have are emitting more radiation or radio frequency levels than these small cell towers?
The question isn't the emissions from the facility or from the phone, it's what do people absorb?
Correct.
What are you exposed to? And yes, that's exactly right. These
And that's
are
due to proximity.
due to proximity.
Okay, thank you.
If I may, the phone is a dynamic device, and if there is no cell site nearby, it will operate at high power in order to reach the nearest site. If there's a site close by, and it's just an efficiency thing for battery life, it will power down and operate at less power because it doesn't need much power to reach. So ironically, the phone puts out less energy if there's a cell site nearby.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bill.
My pleasure, thank you.
With that, I'll then open up the public hearing if anyone else would like to comment on this item, and please limit your comments to 3 minutes or less. State your name as you approach the podium and where you live.
Point of order before we begin. Before I start my 3 minutes, if I speak to this particular cell tower, do I need to stay for the whole meeting and speak to the others? Or if I speak against, can I speak against it generally?
You may speak on each of the 3 items individually. All I would ask is that if there are things that you have to say that apply to all three, that let's get it out of the way in the first one. But if there are things that are site-specific, then I would entertain those in other
Okay,
comment.
must I speak to all three, or can it just be general?
You can speak to one at a time, or you can speak to all three.
Okay, I would like to speak to all three. My name is
Fine.
Lori Anderson, Lori Anderson, Anderson. I would like to speak on behalf of all people who are living with cancer. And I would like to say my cell phone is at home and it is turned off because I'm not using it, so I don't carry it around. And these cell towers, I have no choice. I'm not really speaking specifically for me. It's not an AMBI issue because I'm a short timer. But I'm very worried about the children at Sasserini and their parents who walk up by the Safeway all the time and go in. They're going to be close to it all the time. And the people on Studley, they're going to be close to it all the time. So if the emission is 20 times less than my cell phone, it doesn't matter if I'm going to be exposed continually. It's going to be cumulative, and that bothers me, especially for the young children. I'm not sure why we need this. With all due respect to the people who are living on high tech, I think that our service is fine, and I'm not sure that we really need to go through this, and I'm not sure the FCC says we have to go through it. It just says what we have to do if we want to do this. So I would be very concerned there. And the other question I would have for staff, and you've probably already looked at this, is at the one on 5th Street and Studley, that is a horrible intersection. People die there a lot, so you may want to speak to traffic, and before you decide where you're going to put it, take a look at whether or not down the line in 5 years, 10 years, you're going to have a street light there, because it could be much easier to do it one way now and not have to change it later. I very much object to them. 1, 2, 3, 4, however many you're discussing, I object to them all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jean Louise Camus, JeanneLouise, Camus is CAMUS. And I just want to say I oppose all of the proposed towers. I don't think they're necessary. There's very good service in that area. I live surrounded by 3 of them, proposed towers. I'd say on the east side, there's not very good service, but they're not being proposed there. So I just want to say I oppose them. I'm a mother. I'm a young person. I want to stay healthy. So thank you.
Thank you.
Well, good evening. George Thompson, 311 Nicole Lane, Sonoma, California. While the media's attention with regard to environmental issues has been captured by climate change, fracking, and plastics in the ocean, an international appeal to stop 5G on Earth and in space has been quietly making the way around the world, signed by 4,800 scientists, 2,800 medical doctors, 770 beekeepers, 2,000 environmental organizations, and 180,000 others from 207 countries and territories. This appeals on the world's government to stop the deployment of 5G. On January 25th, 2020, environmental groups are planning more than 210 events in over 200 cities in 20 countries, with more being added every day. Their goal is to stop the deployment of millions of 5G antennas on Earth and 50,000 5G satellites in space, and to secure emergency high-level meetings with officials and governments and international government organizations, including the European Union, the United Nations, and the World Health Organization. The issue is microwave radiation, which has been steadily intensifying over the last 2 decades, courtesy of the wireless revolution. 5G will bring a huge increase in radiation virtually overnight, everywhere, in cities, suburbs, parks, nature preserves, wildlife refuge, oceans, Greenland, and Antarctica. Instead of cell towers every few miles, there will be cell towers, small but powerful, in front of every 3rd to 5th home. Instead of 2,000 satellites orbiting the Earth, there will be 50,000. The organizers of this event on January 25th include people who have already been so severely injured by wireless devices
that they can no longer participate in society at all. They are fighting for their own lives, the lives of their children, and the lives of the insects, birds, animals, and all of us. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments.
Sabina Cesar, 406 Rosalie Drive, Sonoma. Okay. Thank you, commissioners and staff. Tonight you'll be deciding the fate of the city of Sonoma. Verizon, together with FCC and federal government, are preventing cities like ours all over the country from making our own choices that will affect our health and well-being and that of our children for many decades to come. This is beyond appalling. Appalling because it blocks us, regular citizens, from having any control over our well-being and our decision-making. Instead, like many other cities in the Bay Area, the city of Sonoma will base its decision today not on whether this product is good or necessary, or whether it's been tested for safety based on modern insight and research. No, the decision will not be based on any of that. Sonoma's decision will be based on how to avoid being sued by Verizon and CBR. This is unprecedented in the history of our municipal authority. This is a coercion through fear of retribution. Many other cities have denied the permits to Verizon. Monterey, Piedmont, Danville, Hillsborough, Seaside, Los Altos, and most of them have subsequently been sued. Verizon announced the results of their cell phone survey, claiming a majority of respondents were in favor of increased coverage. Has anyone read the contents of the survey? It paints a glowing picture of supposed benefits. You can download movies in 2 split seconds. But it never mentions the dark side of this electronic magnetic delivery system, that it is toxic, that it causes health issues, severe health issues, that the average citizen has very few benefits, and that the service contracts will be more expensive. Most of our present electronic gadgets will have to be updated, like phones, computers, TVs. All will be outdated and required for expensive updates. Somebody is going to make a lot of money on this. Do you think the results would be as positive on the survey if they had been told all these points? Here in Sonoma, we have brought you a petition signed by over 300 people and neighbors. We expressed our opposition to the installation of these cell towers anywhere in Sonoma, and we demand that our voices be heard. Unfortunately, these toxic 5G cell towers were installed in cities like Santa Rosa, Sacramento. How did it happen? These communities were blindsided. What can we do?
I'm sorry, your time is up.
Can I finish my sentence?
Yes.
This community, if the decision is against us, this community will appeal. And if anybody has watched the news coverage on Fox on Wednesday morning, the information and education of the public will push back against this more and more. This will not be the last thing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Amanda Marino, A-M-A-N-D-A-M-A-R-I-N-O. I live at 541 Oregon Street, which is right on the back side of that, the Plaza Shopping Center right there. I have a little boy. I also am 6 weeks pregnant. I don't want to be exposed to all that radiation. Now, you folks have said it's at its lowest point right now, but that's because the 5G is not in effect yet, right? That can change once the 5G goes into effect. I don't feel that it's safe to have it near a school. I don't feel that it's safe for the kids. Nobody knows what this new technology will really have an effect on our bodies. There's something that I would like to read to you. It's from the Scientific American. It says that the latest cellular technology, 5G, will employ millimeter waves for the first time in addition to microwaves that have been in use for the older cellular technologies, 2G through 4G. Given limited reach, 5G will require cell antennas every 100 to 200 meters, exposing many people to millimeter wave radiation. 5G also employs new technologies, active antennas, capable of beam forming, phased arrays, massive multiple inputs and outputs, which pose unique challenges for measuring exposures. Millimeter waves are mostly absorbed within a few millimeters of human skin and in the surface layers of the cornea. Short-term exposure can have adverse physiological effects in the peripheral nervous system, the immune system, and the cardiovascular system. The research suggests that long-term exposure may pose health risks to skin and eyes and also the testes. There's no way that anybody knows what this new technology will do to people, and I don't think it's fair to have it that close to a school. And if you guys already had them move one tower from in front of St. Francis, right? A couple of blocks away from the school, I think you guys should really consider doing that with this cell tower as well. It shouldn't be that close to a school where kids are. It's one of the main intersections, elderly, and everybody walks over there. Thank you for your time, and I really hope that you guys consider what all of us are opposing.
Thank you.
My name is Julie J. I live at 783 Garland Avenue in Sonoma. I've been a nurse since 1981 and a nurse practitioner since 1985, and I've been a researcher at UCSF for 13 years. I wanted to first say that it doesn't comfort me if the FCC thinks it's okay. I feel like we can't necessarily believe that all of our federal agencies are free of political motivation. And I want to...
Please hold your applause. If you care to agree with something, we just wave your hands.
I want to read from an article, a research abstract in Environmental Research, August 2018. Controversy continues with regards to harm from current 2G, 3G, and 4G wireless technologies. 5G's technologies are far less studied for human and environmental effects. Radio frequency radiation is increasingly being recognized as a new form of environmental pollution. Like other common toxic exposures, the effects of radio frequency electromagnetic radiation will be problematic, if not impossible, to sort out epidemiologically, as there no longer remains an unexposed control group. Effects can also be nonlinear. Because this is the first generation to have cradle-to-grave lifetime exposure to this level of man-made microwave radio frequencies, it will be years or decades before the true health consequences are known. Precaution in the rollout of this new technology is strongly indicated. As anyone who studies statistics know, and in health-related research, you must have a control group, and you have to research it long enough to know. You have to include in utero time exposures. I don't see anything that can assure us that this is safe. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
My name is Shelley Masters. I live at 336 Banchero Street. And thank you for moving the cell tower from Pharmaca, where my house is nearby. We're all sensitive to electrical fields. All of nature is. But these non-ionizing low-energy data-carrying transmissions are pulsed on and off like an invisible strobe light. They are artificially man-made and not found in nature. We haven't evolved with them. But the body is intelligent. It has an immune response. Everyone is different, and the symptoms are varied and can be very subtle. I have electromagnetic sensitivity, and I can feel these cell towers. I got zapped, but most people will develop their symptoms over time. And over time, these symptoms can be disabling, and children are using this powerful technology now at a very young age. I am not anti-technology. I am for safe technology. The level set by the FCC is one of the highest in the world. Professor Norm Ulster of Harvard University at the Safra Center for Ethics wrote a paper exploring the outdated 1996 Telecommunications Act that prevents cities from considering the health issues. It's called A Captured Agency, How the FCC is Dominated by the Industry It Regulates. This is available on Amazon. A Captured Agency, Norm Ulster. Read this and then ask yourself if the FCC's thermal level is safe. It's not. The standard is essentially unlimited, and the FCC is not a health agency. Now, I wanted to put in a public record the global 5G protest, January 25th, that's Saturday, and it's going to run for 2 weeks. It's www.stop5ginternational.org, and it's all around the world. Australia, Austria, Belgium, Bermuda, Canada, Costa Rica, Croatia, Cyprus, Czech Republic, Denmark, Estonia, Finland, France, Germany, Greece, Ireland, Hungary, Italy, Japan, Malta, Norway, Netherlands, New Zealand, Philippines, Poland, Portugal, Romania, Serbia, Slovenia, South Africa, Spain, Sweden, Switzerland, United Kingdom, and United States.
Thank you.
Will Ackley, Weinberg, California. Painting contractor, lifetime, beekeeper, 15 years. Don't even get me started on the bee situation. That's a conversation that would take a lot longer than 3 minutes. By the way, on the way here tonight, listening to the radio, the doomsday clock has been moved from very low to low, closest it's been since the Cold War. And one of the things they listed that they measure the doomsday clock by, one of the monitors, is disruptive technology. Something to ponder. I'm not going to go there right now. I was forced to move this last summer. I moved to the airport down on 8th Street East. And there's 8 smart meters outside of within 25 feet of my bedroom. I've been a painting contractor my whole life. I haven't, I was lucky not to suffer from any headaches and from some of the exposure that I'm sure I got during that trade. I've always ran a pretty healthy lifestyle. I move into this situation with the smart meters. I immediately started getting headaches. I thought it was off-gassing. They had just remodeled where I moved into. After a few months, still had the headaches, and just looked over at those smart meters, started thinking about them, and I talked to a consultant here in town and draped them with tin foil, and then I put aluminum screening over it, a couple other things, and it got better. But I'm still suffering from headaches, and I'm going to move, and I'm completely bummed out about that. This whole radiation absorption thing is really something. The other thing I think about quite often is when I was growing up, 60 and 50 years ago, born in 1958, we had the 20-year study on all this stuff. And it's almost laughable now that nothing goes through the 20-year study. It's a couple of years, they put the the product out on the market, and we go with risk management. See if anybody falls down dead or anybody complains too much. If not, we just keep going with it. Another just quick point, the flight attendants, they don't talk about it right now, but they're all coming up with cancer from 20 years ago when there was a smoking section on an airplane. So our corporations have led us down quite a path, and I'm just wondering where I'm going to go 20 years from now to see what I develop, Alzheimer's or whatever, from exposures. Who do I get to go to say, hey, I need some help now at this time in my life? It's very scary for me. I'll be moving again, hopefully out in a heavily wooded area without any cell towers or anything too close by. But that's my piece.
Okay, thank you.
Good evening. My name's Robbie Leeds. I live in the Springs. Happy to be joining my friends and neighbors here and requesting you do not approve this 5G rollout in Sonoma. As you've heard, many local communities, Sebastopol, Mill Valley, and Los Gatos down the peninsula have already rejected the application for 5G in residential areas, and I hope Sonoma does that as well. In fact, I hope this board goes beyond the town of Sonoma and implores our county to not allow 5G in residential areas, and I hope the county goes to the state and makes this universal. Myself, I have solar on my roof. I had a PG&E meter on the other side of the wall from my bedroom. I had it removed, and I no longer have a smart meter, but I pay extra for not having a smart meter. I work on the advisory board at Sonoma Community Clinic, and I've noticed that women are complying with their pap smears, but they are not complying with their mammograms. The main fear is radiation. I think we've noticed in our lifetimes a huge spike in cancers, and most people attribute to the huge spike in radiation that we're all suffering from. A little assuredness that the radiation put out by 5G is not harmful is certainly required before you permit this application. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments.
My name is Mark Marthaler, and I live in Sonoma. So this is on 006, and we'll have opportunity to comment on the other two?
Yes.
Okay. Well, this is going to be kind of a for all three, a general comment regarding the people that work or own businesses in these areas. We didn't see any kind of outreach or surveys done by Verizon or CBR Group in the packet. There was a couple mention of a couple businesses that they did talk to or highlighted as how the light fixture would, benefit them. But we went around to all these businesses, as many as we could find, whose owners were there, talked to all the employees. We didn't have as much time as we wanted to, but we did the best we could. We got over 30 signatures from business owners or principals of the business, and several signed statements from employees who actually spend a great deal of their time at these businesses. We went to the new locations, the old locations. There's businesses that have that deal in children's clothes, McCallew's. Lots of pregnant women go to this store. There's a toy store across, in the right by the Best Western location. There's a ballet school. So I have a minute and a half. I'm just going to read the letter that the business owners signed. To whom it may concern, I have seen the packet from Verizon CBR that shows a new cell tower being considered for installation in close proximity to my business. My safety and the safety of my employees and customers will be put at risk. The City of Sonoma's municipal code includes provisions for the safety of its citizens. I ask that you enforce these regulations. Sonoma Muni Code 5.32.12 NIER exposure says the following about public health. No telecommunications facility shall be located or operated in such a manner that it poses, either by itself or in combination with other such facilities, a potential threat to public health. I believe that this new location will negatively impact my business. The tower needs to be relocated. Please find another location for this tower that is away from businesses, schools, or homes. Problem is, each time the tower gets relocated, we do a survey, and it's the same result. So it just happens that there's people at each location. It's kind of a problem. I can continue the rest of this the next opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, commissioners and staff. Lou Marie DeVincent. Just real quickly, I wanted to mention that our cell phones are making us sick. Yes, they're radiating and they're dangerous and they are making people sick. And the difference between the towers and our phones is you can't turn these towers off. They'll be radiating 24/7, 365. So it really annoys me when they compare our phones to the towers. That's a big difference. I wanted to read you some excerpts from a guest column in the Point Raised Light by a doctor, Cindy Russell. She said she was a physician who studied and developed policies for environmental toxins for over 25 years. Wireless technology and infrastructure is a broad environmental and human toxin. The devices we use, cell phones, laptops, smart everything, we're told are safe, that we do not really know if there is harm. She says that her and 250 other expert scientists conclude the opposite. The standard set by the FCC is based only on a single impact, heating of the tissues. This is like a cooking standard, and it ignores other biological effects. Nature and human biology are much more complex than technology. When non-ionizing electromagnetic radiation is emitted from wireless devices, it passes through us and is variably absorbed in our bodies. The radiation is absorbed by water and blocked by metal. Of 100 peer-reviewed articles on radio frequency, radiation, and oxidation, 93 studies found a positive result, that is, resulting damage to DNA, lipids, and proteins. This is not a thermal effect, it is a biological effect. Addiction and the overuse of wireless devices is especially problematic for children. A new article, this is from January 2020, a new article in the Journal of the American Medical Association Pediatrics showed evidence of microstructural brain changes and brain shrinkage in children aged 3 to 5 who have an electronic device more than 1 hour a day. Studies on cell towers show an increase in cancer in those living within 1,500 feet of towers. Other studies show an alteration in stress hormones and blood abnormalities. Wireless radiation can also affect the health, behavior, and migration of animals. Bees, as our beekeeper Will has emphasized, are particularly sensitive in plants and trees. So I hope that you will consider this and vote no and deny these permits. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn.
Hello, my name is Laura Spears of Sonoma, California. I don't have anything planned to say. I heard this meeting was happening and I rushed down because I think it's very important for you guys to be reminded very simply that there are all sorts of things that we have been told are very safe, and we're just finding out that not everything is safe. So I'm just telling you very simply, for the sake of my own health and also my children, please consider what may be to come of all the residents of Sonoma, and why can't we be pioneers in putting a stop to it and preventing something horrible from happening, because there's just not enough for me to feel comfortable with the safety of this technology. There just isn't. And I'm not an expert, but it doesn't seem safe to me. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Stephanie Hiller. I live in Sonoma. I just want to bring up the larger picture. 5G is not just a movie download trick. It's a global network. It has military and surveillance applications that it can lead to. It has the capacity also to mine your data from your phone, is my understanding. So, you know, data is the new gold. So there's money in this network. It consumes, all Wi-Fi consumes large amounts of energy. So it will make it harder to supply enough energy to the system without fossil fuels in the transition we all dearly hope will happen soon. So what do we get for it? Self-driving cars and the Internet of Things. It'll turn the lights on from, you know, while you're driving home from your job, and various other things. I don't know. I can't understand how it can cook a chicken, but that's what we get. I don't think we need it. We need a more human world, not a more automated one. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Leslie Carath. I feel like I'm going to have a heart attack. That was sort of a joke. 2020 is the year that we do the right thing, and this is so obvious. I want to cry a little bit because I haven't been here, and I want to thank all of you. There's no sign.
Please address the
I'm sorry.
commission.
I want to
Thank you.
thank you all for, I had no idea. My friend just brought me here tonight. But I want to say that 2020 is the year we do the right thing. Do the right thing. And thank you, people. You're awesome. You guys are so awesome.
Thank you. Anyone else? Seeing none. Oh, we have one more.
I'm Kathleen Herrera. I live on West MacArthur Street. I spoke at the meeting in October, and I just want to say again and kind of reiterate what the other moms have said tonight, is that we want a choice in what our kids are exposed to. And I think that's the huge difference here is I'm on my kids about their screen time all the time. You know, they're not allowed to have wireless devices. I turn my phone on to airplane mode. I don't keep it on my body. And now we're saying that the kids at Sasserini, they don't get a choice. We're just going to see what happens with them. We're going to put this tower next to their school and cross our fingers and hope that in 25 years, nothing bad happens about it. So as a parent, I'm strongly opposed to the towers. And as someone else said, there's really no good place for them. It's always going to be near someone's home. It's always going to be near someone who's pregnant or has children. They don't want their kids to be the guinea pigs in the experiment of 5G. We just don't want to do it. So please, I ask the commission to consider that we really don't want this location by the school, but I think that most locations, there's going to be somebody who is going to be opposed to it. The other thing is that I've seen the smart meters, and I know other people have talked on that tonight, but I'm also a person who removed the smart meter from my house. I have an autoimmune disease and I have EMF sensitivity, and once the smart meter was taken away, a lot of my symptoms got much better. So for people who are going to be living near these towers, again, taking away their choice, putting them in a position where their health could be at risk, and telling them that, sorry, there's nothing you can do about it. I think that that in itself is reason enough to oppose all the towers. So I hope you guys can make the right decision tonight, and thank you so much for your thoughtful questions and for persevering through this whole process. I think it's been quite a process, so thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? I'm seeing none, so I'm going to close this public hearing on this item and bring it back to the bring it back to the commission for further discussion, consideration, and possible action. So I'll open it up, and you may go first.
Thank you. I've got a few follow-up questions for staff. A lot of the public has mentioned 5G. I want to clarify that the application before us is for 4G, no 5G. 5G is not part of this application. Now, my question for staff is, if Verizon wants to convert to 5G using the towers that the city approves, does that require a future application?
We can certainly have the applicant respond to the question. I'll give you my understanding, and that is that the applications before you are for a 4G process technology, but it is going to be expandable to 5G. And as presently constituted, there's no condition of those that we've provided that require any kind of a use permit or permit of any kind to expand to 5G.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. The second question I've got is for Mr. Adachi. It has to do with the purview of this commission and the issue of police power pertaining to the health and welfare of the community. The city council, I know, has got police power with regard to decisions pertaining to health and welfare. And while I understand that federal regulations may be seen as a constraint on a city's ability to impose that police power regulating the public health and welfare. My question is, when it comes to this commission, my impression has always been that the Planning Commission does not have purview on matters of health and welfare. In other words, we are not exercised, nor can we exercise police power in that regard. Can you advise me on that?
So the Planning Commission's purview is to make a determination on the application based upon the findings and standards that are in the staff report. And those would be what the applicant and what the community could expect on the basis of the city's municipal code that the Planning Commission or the council would apply to an application for a use permit. And that is what's laid out in the staff report and in staff's recommendation to approve. And to deny on any other basis would not conform with the municipal code requirements.
So, if I'm interpreting your remarks correctly, you are telling me that making a decision, that this commission is constrained from making a decision about what it considers to be a matter of health or welfare, that is not and cannot be part of is not within the powers of this commission. Is that what you're telling me?
Well, number one, the federal constraints are very important because this commission is prohibited from making a decision regulating the placement, construction, or modification of the facilities on the basis of the environmental effects of radio frequency emissions to the extent that those facilities comply with the FCC's requirements. So to the extent that that's the health and welfare consideration, it's very clear that the city is preempted as long as the city can determine that the emissions comply with the FCC standards, which is what has been done here.
I understand, but for example, coming up with a hypothetical case, which is that this matter makes its way to the city council, either through an appeal of the public or an appeal of the applicant, that it would then be up to the city council to decide whether it wanted to challenge, for example, the FCC requirements and take their chances in court, and from what you're saying, probably lose, maybe with a summary judgment. But in any event, that would be their prerogative and within their purview as the elected body in the city that can commit the city to potential legal action. This body can't commit the city to any legal action of any kind. We don't have that authority. Am I correct?
This body does not have final decision-making authority, as it would be subject to an appeal of the council. So there could not be a court proceeding that would be filed on the basis of a determination made by this body.
Okay, thank you.
Back to, I need some more clarity as a follow-up to my fellow commissioner's question, and that has to do with the 4G, 5G. I've sat in now, and this is like my fourth or fifth or sixth iteration of this topic, and it was clearly stated to me that the application is for 4G. And it has been inferred by the applicant that there is no interest in 5G because we are a relatively small town. We aren't dense like Santa Rosa or San Francisco, and so therefore my focus has been on 4G. I find it extremely disconcerting that because of the way our hands are tied, that should there be interest in the future to have the carrier upgrade to 5G, that we as a body have no opportunity to render any additional comment. That suggests that if we can only speak to aesthetics, then is it implied that if they were to upgrade it, that there would be absolutely no physical, visible change to the tower, because that right now is what we are, quote, judging. We are evaluating it for it's a beauty contest, if I could use that expression. So I just need to hear that one more time, that regardless, that the application is for 4G, but because of the way things are structured and the way the FCC works or ties our hands, that we will have, as a review body, no opportunity to influence on the upgrade of the towers to 5G.
So clearly, you can ask that question of the applicant with respect to the technology that will be needed to get to 5G. We've provided conditions of approval that basically say that if they want to make changes to their equipment, if they do so within the antenna shroud, they can do that, or underground, if that's where the radios are to be placed, they can do that, so long as there's no expansion or physical change from an aesthetic perspective. That being said, I can't tell what will be needed from a technological standpoint as to whether they need 2 radios or 3 radios on the exterior of the pole or underground in order to facilitate 5G. So defer to the applicants.
Hi, Mark Peters. I think I can. There's probably 2 answers to that question. I'm going to answer one. I think we'll have Paul Albrin answer the other. The first question is, as far as the equipment today that provides 4G or 5G service is very different. The antenna must be integrated with the radio for 5G, and from a form factor perspective, it would look different than what we are proposing today. So the use permit today would be based on the form factor that we have today. It could not be upgraded to 5G without changing that form factor to some fashion. I can't tell you that that will always be the case, but the second part of that, and I'll let maybe Mr. Albritton come up and talk about it, is, or maybe I will, is that I'm not aware of any city that allows us to make modifications without a permit. And so we always have to come back to get a permit, whether either be through the Planning Commission, through the Building Department, through the Public Works Department, with any city. So if you're offering that we can do work without permits, I'm sure there'd be lots of carriers that would be interested in that, but I don't understand that to be the case.
Well, it seems to me a simple solution would be to add a condition that says that no modifications to the equipment will be permitted without returning for another use permit.
And so, Mr. Chair, you would then need to make some modifications or change the conditions that we have in the staff report.
Yes, but that is a possibility.
And should that be the case, I would like to have on the record the applicant agree to that condition, should that be the case.
Okay. Can we get an opinion from the applicant on whether you would accept a condition that would require you to come back for any modification of equipment?
Mark is correct that there would have to be a change in the radio in order to provide 5G, so there has to be a permit. There is a federal law that says that any modification of a facility that doesn't substantially change the physical dimensions of the facility may not be denied and shall be approved. It still requires a permit, but it's impossible to say whether a use permit will be required either at that time or based on subsequent changes in code in Sonoma or elsewhere. So I think that we would be subject to the code at the time. And that, frankly, that kind of condition wouldn't be enforceable in the face of current federal law.
But it would be enforceable if there were a change in form factor or a change of equipment.
Yeah, the federal law says, like I just said, that if there's if there's no change, if the language is if there's a substantial change in the physical dimensions. If there's a substantial change in the physical dimensions, it has to come back for a permit. But they add to that it can't defeat the concealment elements. So if we were just to change, there was just recently a case where they went from a radome that was 2 feet to 4 feet wide and from 5 feet to 7 feet tall. And the court said that that was a change in the concealment element, and that did not fall under this federal preemption. So I hope that answers your question. But if it's going to look different, then it would not qualify for administrative approval. It would have to come back for a use permit. If it looks identical, then the federal law would trump any kind of local condition of approval. That's as straight an answer as I can give you. I can also tell you there's no plan to bring 5G to Sonoma anytime soon, for particularly the reasons that we just heard.
I have a question for you.
Yes.
Here.
Thank you.
If there was a desire to change to 5G, would there be a physical change in the appearance of the equipment that is being proposed? Or could you substitute out what you're putting in with 5G compatible equipment without any significant physical change, such that we would fit within the limitations that you just described, and we would be preempted?
Let me give you, and I apologize for giving a somewhat technical answer. I'm not an RF engineer, but sometimes I act like one. The 5G is a software change, and what it does is it allows for the change from 3G to 4G was something they call MIMO, multiple in, multiple out, where you can use more frequencies to convey the same data at the same time. And 5G expands and allows more multiple in, multiple out. So companies like T-Mobile and Sprint and AT&T, to a certain extent, they've been advertising some 5G, are using existing cellular bands to provide what they're calling 5G. And so that is not in the current plans for Verizon Wireless. The concerns you're hearing from the audience, I believe, are regarding millimeter wave. And both AT&T and Verizon bought millimeter wave, which is just a very tight frequency. A millimeter wave is actually infrared. Infrared light is a millimeter wave. They bought 23G, which is a little bit bigger than millimeter wave, but it's all below the visible wavelengths. So and this is not in any of Verizon's plans, but you asked me a very technical question, if Verizon decided to use that software with its current cellular bands, it could technically be called 5G. That is not their plan at this time. But there's a great misunderstanding regarding 5G and what it is. But it's basically software, just like upgrading from Windows XP to Windows 10 or something, in terms of how the existing radio waves are used more efficiently to provide data. And I think Mr. Afflerbach could probably provide you with additional information. And that's a long way of saying that if they would still have to swap out the radio, but if they were to use existing cellular bands with that new software, technically they could use they would still have to swap out the radio, but the antennas for they'd have to swap out the antennas. They'd still have to swap out both pieces of equipment, but it would look it could potentially look similar.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, if I can, I'm going to see if I can recap a couple of thoughts that are out there. So as I mentioned, condition number 13 and 14 in your packet on page 67 of 202, we provided there that if there are changes or modifications to the equipment of the new streetlight pole within the shroud, the applicant would not need to come back for any discretionary permits. I'm going to focus on the word permit here in a minute because there's two types. There's the ministerial, where you go in and get a building permit, and it will have very minor review, doesn't see the light of day of the public hearing. And then the discretionary permit is one that is what we're reviewing this evening. Number 14 talks about should there be equipment be required underground, that any modifications or changes to that equipment below ground, they would be permissible without coming back for a Mother May I permit. I guess that's the best way I can say it. And that would again be the discretionary side. If there was a desire of the commission to have a new condition number 16 that talked about the switch from 4G to 5G, I would suggest, and council can certainly correct me here, it would say words to the effect of, should the applicant choose to utilize 5G technology at some point in the future on this streetlight pole number 006, a use permit amendment / modification shall be required. And that's something for you to discuss or entertain at your leisure.
If I could comment on that for a moment. If the because the use permit is regarding the equipment, the exterior equipment on the pole, if the applicant were to agree that, from what we've heard tonight at least, the radio or the antenna were to be modified or were to be changed during the life of the use permit, that the applicant would have to come back to get an amendment to the use permit and go through the use permit process, and would waive any rights the applicant may have under federal law to be excluded from the use permit, then such a condition might work. But that would be with the applicant's agreement and with the applicant's waiver, as Mr. Albritton has brought up the federal law substantial modification standard. Because we don't know if it would be a substantial modification or not.
Right. So we would need a agreement by the applicant that they would be willing to accept that condition.
That would be my view.
Would you care to comment on that?
You're asking if we would agree to a condition that we would have to get a use permit in order to modify the facility from 4G to 5G?
If you made changes to the equipment.
Any changes to the equipment? I guess.
Well, we could make it more specific and say 4G to 5G if that's more amenable.
Yeah, no, it's not. I'm sorry.
Okay.
And I'm not in a position to waive federal law rights of Verizon Wireless. I just am not. And it would be, I suppose, a real question of whether there was even authority to do that.
Okay.
So no, we can't agree to that, to conditions that are fun. I will reiterate, and I know I'm not supposed to respond to the audience, that this is a 4G tower. And it's not even a tower, it's a 4G small cell, and there are no plans for 5G currently in Sonoma because of the density. There's no demand for that kind of service. 5G travels a very short distance. It doesn't go very far, and so these poles have been designed for 4G radios, and the distances between them have been designed for 4G service. 5G service has to be quite a bit more dense, so it's not even in consideration. But at the same time, I'll just say that the federal law is very clear in the Clarkstown case that your council is aware of in the Second Circuit, that local jurisdictions can't regulate the technology that a wireless company uses to provide service to its customers. It is preempted by FCC regulation of the radio waves, and the reason that occurs is because it's a national network of wireless service, and we can't have different policies in each jurisdiction and a hopscotch of technologies across the country, I have to politely say no. I'm not in a position to agree to that kind of condition.
I have a follow-up question that I meant to ask earlier. At the beginning of the evening, I asked for clarification from our city attorney on the question of whether or not it was incumbent upon Verizon to show the necessity for these towers, and the answer was no, because it's a commercial district. That bothers me, because I think there's certainly reason to perceive that these aren't needed. The reason you don't say they're needed is because you really want to eventually use them for 5G, and that you're just getting your foot in the door. And that, I mean, that's kind of the way it looks. And when I asked about this before, the gentleman that you brought with you that was I understood his expertise was in the technological side of things, And he pretty much conceded you didn't need them, you wanted them to quote him directly, stay ahead of the curve. Staying ahead of the curve to me means that you really want 5G and you're just setting up the infrastructure to get that when you want it, when this little community is ripe for it. And that disturbs me. So I would like somebody over there to tell me why it is you need these. Not why you want them, but why do we need these?
So
Please, no
I know-
comments from the audience.
I know this has been going on for 2 years, but we actually did provide coverage maps and needs assessment analysis to you almost 2 years ago that were reviewed by your consultant, Lee Afflerback. And our sites are all about a mile away from the downtown. The service that's being received in downtown is on our lowest frequency band, the 700 megahertz band, which travels farther but carries less data. We buy our frequencies from the Verizon Wireless buys its frequencies from the federal government when they're available, and only 1/4 of the bandwidth that Verizon has is in that 700 megahertz band. And 3/4, and this is all in Mr. Afflerbach's report, all 3/4 of that bandwidth is in higher bandwidths, which are the PCS and AWS bandwidths, which don't travel as far because they're at 2.1 gigahertz in a higher frequency. They don't travel as far, but they carry more data. As a result, there is a lack of access to our AWS and PCS, 75% of our network, lack of access in the precise locations of these poles. And in Mr. Afflerbach's report from October 2018, he says that you are unable to access the AWS and PCS frequencies of our service, and this severely compromises our ability to provide service by we don't have the capacity on that 1/4 of our frequency to serve the customers that are currently seeking service, and at the same time, that signal, even in these areas, is weak. So we did make a necessity case. It was confirmed by your third-party engineer, and we're putting these facilities in to provide service to people who require it for their daily lives. And I can go on and on about over half the homes don't have wireline phone anymore. 70% of 911 calls are done on a cell phone. 50% of those are done by people in their homes. And I'm sure you went through power outages, and I've been evacuated 3 times in the last 2 years. And at those times, my cell phone was what allowed me to know that I had to evacuate and remain in communications when power was out. These are extremely important facilities to have adequate service, and we've already demonstrated the need for these particular facilities, and it's been confirmed by the third-party engineer.
Beg my indulgence, though.
Please.
The disturbing part of that whole scenario is that we have had nobody approach the podium in this town that says, we need better service from Verizon. We have not had a single person approach the podium and say, we need better service. You have told us you want to provide better service for your customers, but we don't see the customers. So we're looking at this from a different point of view, saying, you're offering a product, but maybe we don't want the product.
We have done, you've heard some text messages where we've had hundreds of people supporting these facilities. The last time I was here, there was a proposal for a modification of a downtown building to turn it into a restaurant or something. And there was only the applicant as a supporter, and everyone else was opposing the proposal. I think you're a planning commission. I'm sure you're aware that most of the time you're dealing, I was a planning commissioner, most of the time you're dealing with people who have objections to a project, and less people show up in favor of a project. I have to tell you, with 30 years of experience, that's particularly true of wireless facilities. Our customers are not anxious to come out and stand in front of an unhappy crowd and say that they like their phone or that their service isn't working. But it's important for public safety, it's important for your first responders, it's important for any number of people. And there are many, many stories about lives that have been saved by 911 calls. So we do conduct public and customer outreach and participate in the community in any number of ways, but we don't recruit and bring people here to these meetings to tout our services. But while I'm here, I just would like to say one thing about vaulting. We still consider that. We concur with the remarks from from your city attorney this evening, that our objection was to the word possible. We think if you're looking as to whether the vaulting is feasible, we also presented a feasibility analysis to you about a year ago about why vaulting is infeasible for Verizon Wireless due to if the power goes out and it's raining, our radios get wet and have to be discarded, and we can't subject our network to that kind of unreliability. And thank you for letting me add that. Unless there are any other questions, we've spent 2 years coming up with the absolute best design and best locations that we could for Sonoma, and we've worked very carefully with you. We've not been threatening litigation. We've been doing everything we can to provide the best design and locations for you. We prefer to work with communities like Sonoma and Napa to come up with something that can be acceptable to the community, and that's why we're here tonight.
Thank you. I don't see further questions, so anybody care to open the discussion?
Mr. Chair, I'm sorry. I was speaking with Mr. Afflerbach just a moment ago. He suggested that perhaps there could be a condition regarding if they increase power to the facility.
A number of the cities that we work with have conditions, what they call minor changes, that require to demonstrate that they do meet the FCC requirements when they make changes to the nature. So you've got the physical changes. In this case, every time we've made a modification, they've come back with studies showing that they're in compliance with the FCC emission standards, and those are typical requirements that many communities have. But in other words, they're basically showing that they're in full compliance with the FCC regulations.
Well, we currently have a condition like that in there, don't we? That they have to comply with the FCC and it can be monitored on a periodic basis?
Yes, we do. I think if I can just read between the lines from what Lee is saying, though, is that perhaps a condition number 16 would say something like, should the applicant wish to utilize a technology that would increase power by whatever, millimeters, milliseconds, and milliwatts. I don't know what the terminology will be. But that could then require a conditional use permit amendment or modification. Is that what you're talking about, Lee?
Yeah, typically what happens, particularly this is in the case of macro towers, the large towers, the macro towers, but can also be in the small towers, that if power is increased, in other words, if you're going to be adding more radios, there's going to be more radiation out there, and they need to demonstrate what those changes are. The most common one, to give you an example, projects we're doing down in Monterey, where they're putting additional antennas for FirstNet on structures. They're required to come back and show that the composite radiation of all the equipment is well within line. Remember, we focus here on one tower, one pole here, but this is really a community where you have radiation from other carriers, public safety radios and stuff. And so what they really need to demonstrate, and they have here, that they will not materially impact the radiation levels, nor will they exceed the FCC maximum. So that's a pretty common situation.
Thank you. Do you want to talk?
Just following up on that idea then, is there a finite number that we could put in as a threshold for power increase that would, in effect, prevent them from powering up to do a 5G application? See what I'm saying? If our concern is really whether they can just come in and convert this to a 5G without ever having to show up here. And it seems like that is the case. And my question is, if we adopted this idea that we put a condition in there saying if you're going to use more power, you got to come back, would that actually provide us an opportunity to weigh in on upgrading to 5G?
Well, it's certainly, for example, right now, with the radios you have right now, if you had a requirement in there for them to, and this, as I say, that typically when they're adding additional antennas or anything that increases radiation, you can increase radiation by adding antennas, adding additional transmitters. All these things will change the pattern. And all I'm saying is that it's not unreasonable to ask when they go to modify a facility that they provide you with all the documentation. That doesn't mean that precludes them in any way. It's just that the public knows what's happening. In other words, we're not, for example, if you were to put a second radio in there, and let's assume that somebody came up with a radio that was exact the same size. That might happen in the future. It's not going to happen right away. Then you could, in this particular case, you could go, just like we're doing now with changes in antenna, if they were to increase the radiating power, let's say some number, 100% or whatever it is. Remember, the radiation levels of these, which we both calculated here, are below 2%. You could use that as a threshold. Now, what they will agree to, or they may not agree to anything, they certainly will agree to showing compliance with the FCC standards. And so obviously, how do you show standards compliance? You have to provide an engineering study that shows that would you make a change? That would be the logical approach from an engineering perspective, not from a legal perspective. I don't practice law. Get much role engineering.
Thank you. My takeaway from that is that essentially, whatever we put in here, they come back and they show us they're in compliance with the FCC, they can do whatever they want. Pretty much it.
If I may clarify one thing I may have said that was misleading. The Verizon 5G that's being deployed in San Francisco, as Mark alluded to, is in the millimeter wave. The millimeter wave is so weak that they have to put the radio and the antenna in the same box. And so if we were to use the 5G that Verizon is deploying in San Francisco and elsewhere, it would be a completely different radio boxes that would have to go on this pole. There'd have to be 3 radio boxes around the pole. It would look completely different. So you asked me the theoretical question, could it be converted to 5G? And I said, well, if we used a different frequency, then yes. But what Verizon is installing now is this combined radio and antenna, 3 boxes that are about 2 feet tall around a pole in San Francisco. So if we were to propose the 5G that Verizon is using, yes, we would have to come back and get a permit because the form factor would change so much.
Let me ask the hypothetical then. You're telling us that it's far better for you to hang the radio on the pole rather than put it underground, because then we have more leverage on if you're changing equipment. If it were undergrounded and it fit within the same underground vault, you could have 2, 3, 4 radios and we would never be able to touch it. Is that correct?
I'd have to agree with that conclusion, yeah.
Okay.
So, Mr. Chair, if I can, I'm sorry. Just to follow up before Council talks, theoretically, you could have an increase in power still fit within the antenna shroud and convert to 5G at some point if technology gets to that point. And I think that's where the commission, or what I'm hearing the commission talk about. So I just want to kind of put it in my own words. And
go ahead.
I just want to follow up on the vaulting conversation. And I believe the word possible was changed to feasible. And they've just said that they submitted a feasibility analysis in the last 2 years. I mean, I remember that analysis that says it's infeasible. Does that change staff's recommendation?
No, not your planning staff's recommendation anyway. Clearly the word possible is what we're to look at as the standard. And what I saw from that report, which was for entirely different antennas back in November of 2018, I haven't received anything that's demonstrated to me that it's not possible to underground. I understand the concept of vaulting. I see vaulting all throughout the city. In the when we talk later about 012, there's vaulting inside the street, the traveled way. So I don't think that intimidates me as far as the recommendation.
Okay.
Well, and we are not supposed to make a decision based on economic feasibility, are we? In other words, if it is technically possible or feasible, even though it costs more money, that's not our problem. That's the applicant's problem, correct?
Yes.
May I add a supplement to your question, his response
Okay.
on vaulting? So the infeasibility that we provided was based on the fact that it creates an unreliable network. The other vaulting examples that were shown that are around town, there were some from AT&T wireline service, which is underground wires, and there's some from PG&E, which are underground transformers and underground wiring. Those pieces of equipment are designed by that industry to be outside plant, submersible rated. Our radio equipment is not. If you put it underwater, it stops and is dead immediately. So if we lose power and the dewatering system in the vault fails, the site goes down, and it doesn't just go down until a technician shows up. It goes down until a new radio can be sourced and replaced because it damages the radios.
Go ahead.
On the same subject. Just to make sure I heard what you just said, Mark, the impractical aspect of it is that it's not an issue that it can't be done physically. It's just that such a system, given its potential environment and the way your hardware is created, it would create an unreliable system.
Absolutely, and that is the case with the vault that Verizon has. Verizon themselves have not installed the vault anywhere. They have network partners that have installed vaults like Crown Castle, and those do have reliability problems and operational problems currently.
Thought I had a follow-up. I'll see if I can draw it out of me.
Sure.
Well, I'm just going to speak to a number of items here. Obviously, the trend in federal regulatory authority is moving in general under the present administration in as far as I'm concerned, a terrible direction. Regulations were just changed regarding water and overturning water issues, water pollution regulations, groundwater, and seasonal wetland water that have rolled back regulations all the way to the 70s. The FCC and all the other federal regulatory agencies that are now under the purview of the present administration are obviously not particularly concerned with public health and the common good. And this is, of course, just going to add to the kind of public suspicion that that our government is not looking out for the health and welfare of its citizens. It's a terrible situation. You know, we're looking here, and I don't want to sound polemical, but you know, we're looking here at the reality of unfettered capitalism and its drive to compete and accumulate profits. And when Commissioner Barbos focused on the issue of the need for this, obviously we're becoming as a society more dependent on these technologies, but the reality is that the primary need for this is on the part of Verizon to be able to compete with the other companies in this sphere. And when they say stay ahead of the curve, as one of their representatives said, it's really the competitive curve. And as long as the public continues to demand ever increasing speed on the part of wireless networks, this competition and this spiral towards adopting new technologies without invoking what I refer to in what is called in Europe as the cautionary principle is going to continue and it's going to accelerate. And under the administration in Washington, it's going to be even worse. I'm not really sure what the problem is that needs to be solved. As the applicant has stated, the problem is that there's now a growing public safety connection to wireless technology. There's increasing dependency. That certainly is a societal problem, but it's in a particular kind of category, and I think a lot of it has to do with not properly evaluating our technological changes before they're widely adopted. There's a race on the part of corporate America to hurry up and stay ahead of the competition and be able to move out with a marketing message that lets them claim to be the best. And this drive to constantly claim to offer the best and be the best and therefore accumulate customers and the capital that comes along with the accumulation of that profit from those customers is the system we are all embedded in. And the earth and the entire environment is obviously paying the price for this. And it's as a grandfather with 3 grandchildren, I can tell you that it's sobering. It's very sobering to see what's happening to the world. I'm also concerned about, because of the competitive atmosphere, because of communication that came in on this item from other carriers. This is not the first time we're going to be dealing with applications for more small cell towers. And therefore, in part, the degree to which we can impose aesthetic considerations on this application has a bearing on future applications from other carriers. AT&T will eventually come in, and they submitted a highly detailed letter on this matter, widely criticizing our ordinance. They're watching, they're looking, they're paying attention. And Comcast also submitted information on this. So, we're going to face the potential of many of these kinds of installations from varying carriers, all of whom want to compete with each other for consumer dollars going forward. So I think it is very important for us to, as best we can tonight, decide what we want to impose in terms of an aesthetic standard. I am quite convinced that should we impose the conditions suggested by staff, that these vaults be used for the actual equipment, that this industry in its great wisdom and facility will solve the problem of having vaulted equipment. I remember when the first of the underground garages was proposed in Sonoma over on First Street West. And the discussion was, well, the water table moves up and down. We're going to have a water infiltration problem, and how are we ever going to make it so that it doesn't leak, and there's going to be a problem, and they solved it. And so I think that while there may be a reliability issue pertaining to vaults now, there hasn't been enough pressure to acquire vaults so that they could solve the problem of reliability. And I think if the pressure's there, the reliability issue will be solved. So those are my comments at this point. I'm in favor of supporting the vaulting proposal. And then my last remark, once again, will go back to this matter of police power. The city council can decide to make this a federal issue if it wants to. I mean, that's their choice. It's not the choice of this commission to decide that we want to invoke that police power, because it isn't our purview to do it. We're a planning commission, and our purview is limited, as the city attorney explained. So there's no doubt in my mind that whatever we decide tonight,
the matter will go before the city council, where it should go, because this is a big decision, and the people, it's always been my opinion, having been on the city council, that when it comes to the big decisions in this community, the people that get elected need to say yay or nay, because we need to decide whether or not they represent us as citizens the way that we would like. So I believe this will go to the council, and that's where it should go. Nonetheless, we have our responsibility as a commission tonight, and I'm prepared to exercise it.
Thank you. Anyone else care to chime in?
I wish this was a paid position, but it's not, because it's certainly uncomfortable. Because it's my understanding that the best I can do as a planning commissioner is to speak to the aesthetics, and it's something that, because that's kind of the line that I'm in as an architect, I constantly am struggling with what is an aesthetically acceptable tower. I will say that the applicant has put forth considerable effort to respond to previous comments about towers and how they should look and whether they're too fat, too skinny, too tall, too short, whatever. Based upon what I've heard this evening and based upon what I believe is my understanding as to what opportunities we as a commission through use permit have, that change to equipment is something that may trigger a need for another use permit, provided that the profiles change. I'm probably going to be the minority, but I do not think that vaulting this radio makes a significant aesthetic improvement. Doesn't make the antennas disappear, doesn't make it go away. And so to that extent, if I've heard the comments from either the applicant or from our consultant that given at least where the technology is today, that should there be an interest or demand to upgrade to the next generation, that based upon the hardware and technology, they would have to add radios. And if the radio was in a vault, then what I had heard was that if the vault was big enough and they had come up with smaller radios, they could put radios inside the vault, provided that they didn't change the dimensions, and we'd have no say in it. In contrary, what I heard was if the radio is on the pole, that in order to go to the next generation, you would have to conceivably add another radio, or two, or three, whatever, which means that would physically prompt a change. I don't want to lose control over the opportunity to have lose the opportunity to hear about an upgrade via use permit. So personally, as far as my own thoughts this evening, is that I'm, based upon what I've heard, based upon what I've studied and what I've evaluated at the sites, I'm prepared to take action on this item, not undergrounding with a vault.
I really hate the fact that we are so much the victims of a set of constraints that are created by politicians appointing people. I mean, you don't have to, the FCC is like any other regulatory. You get the right person in the White House and they put industry insiders on the body that's supposed to be regulating. So we uniformly put the fox in charge of the hen house all across the regulatory world. It's way worse with the current president than it has been, but it still has happened even with our own Public Utilities Commission. I mean, that's how PG&E got away with all the stuff that led to some of these fires and not maintaining their lines. We just don't ride herd on these companies at the regulatory level the way we should. Larry and others have mentioned the precautionary principle, which should actually be the way things go. It should be, if there's any question of the safety of anything, it should be conclusively presumed to be safe before you're entitled to make the public your guinea pigs. That is not the world we live in. And we ought to think about electing somebody else to the White House. It is a starter for how you might create a world where the people who are regulating these industries actually are looking at public health, safety, and welfare. That said, it would be very tempting to me to just say, no, I don't want to be part of the problem. I hate being told that I have to give you something I don't think you've proven the need for, except so you can compete with your fellow telecommunications companies. But I do think I'm going to come up with a position on this application other than that, and it is that I would support the staff recommendation to vault these, and contrary to, I'm curious what Ron heard, I thought I heard that to go to 5G, you had to put the antenna and the radio together. And if they have to be together, they can't be under, the radio, the antenna cannot be underground. So, as I understand it anyway. So I think we're giving ourselves a little margin of safety there in that regard. And I do think there's an aesthetic benefit of vaulting, and I agree with Larry that if they have to vault, they'll figure out a way to make it work. And so I am in favor of granting this use permit grudgingly, but clearly with a condition for vaulting. The other change in the language that was referred to, I can't say I tracked sufficiently enough to ever make a motion on it, but I support that change. But vaulting has to stay.
Just to follow up on Commissioner Barbos's comments about the FCC, good points. The current chairman of the FCC used to be the general counsel at Verizon.
Point made.
And also appointed to the FCC by President Obama. I just wanted to make that point. But but moving on, I want to echo the comments of my fellow commissioners. I think when it comes to, obviously we heard a lot of comments from the public tonight. Most of it had to do with health and welfare. And as I think everyone in this room understands, we are not allowed to consider that. This commission has just not been vested with that authority to consider health and welfare by the federal government. We're here to follow our own ordinances and those dictated to us by state law and federal law. And so to that extent, I would support, but the one thing we do have the right to control is aesthetics, and so I would support the staff recommendation to vault. If we deny these applications, as Commissioner Barbos described as a tempting option, we would be, I mean, the city of Sonoma, as other cities throughout the Bay Area, would be probably sued and spend considerable amount of money to defend a lawsuit that I don't believe has won at this point in any other city. And so whether that's a good idea or a bad idea, that's not up to us. That's up to the city council. As Commissioner Barnett says, that's a police power decision, and that is not our authority. And so if this item does go to the city council, I would encourage anyone to go there and tell our elected representatives what they think and what they should do. But at this point, I would support staff's recommendation.
Well, I've been going back and forth on this, and I agree that with most of the comments made by the commission up here, that and we all recognize our limited ability to make a decision about anything but aesthetics. I came into this discussion tonight thinking that the most aesthetically appealing thing would be to volt the radio. As we got into discussion, it got to be how much control do we have with change out of equipment. And so I was starting to lean towards putting the radio on the pole. But I think the reality is, as Commissioner Barbos mentioned, you have to marry the radio to the antenna, which is going to change the form factor, so it's probably going to have to come back anyway, because you can't leave the radio in the vault anymore. So I would, because what we have before us is a 4G application, and we have the ability to insist on vaulting. I would support the staff recommendation to vault the radio. And I would also support the additional condition that we had, I think we tried to craft on the fly. We might want to repeat that.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, if I can just go a little bit further back before I get back to a new condition, number 16 perhaps. Council and council from Verizon would have agreed to talk about language relative to a standard agreement. We need to insert that if the commission's of a mind to approve the resolution with conditions. I don't recall the condition number, but Mr. Abachi can certainly work on that while we're talking about some of these other things. Condition number 8, and speaking with the applicant, would be a modification to the testing of the facility after its commencement of use. That would be condition number 8. I'd like to suggest a change to that, if it's of the commission's will in a motion. That would be to strike the word activation and then add some additional language in a moment. It would say prior to use of the wireless telecommunication facility at site 006, comma, or within 30 days of use of the facility, the applicant shall provide, and it read carrying the following way, as presently constituted. The reason for that is explained to me is that there needs to be users on the pole before you can start take readings, and so when it is operating within 30 days, there will be enough time, I believe, for the applicant to then conduct a reading for us to then evaluate that it's under the FCC limits as it becomes active in the community. A new condition number 16, we did talk about with Mr. Afflerbach, talking about some limitation. Now knowing that they would be underground, then the commission could certainly even then talk about should the applicant choose to utilize new technologies to increase power, that a new use permit would be required, and then you could set a standard of what that power increase would be, whether it's 25% of existing power. I'm not sure. I defer to Mr. Afflerbach to pick a number that we could insert. That concludes my comments.
Okay. I think we might be ready to craft a motion.
Chair.
Yes.
So for the other conditions, as David was explaining, we did communicate with Verizon's counsel earlier for condition number 4, which is the maintenance and facility removal agreement, and all of the subsections A through J would be replaced with the following paragraph, which is Verizon Wireless and the city execute a mutually acceptable agreement prior to approval of a building or encroachment permit, whichever occurs first, with reasonable terms that will address operational, transfer of liability, financial responsibility, and safety factors to promote, ensure, or protect the public convenience and safety in usage of the city's rights of way. Since the indemnification clause was one of the subsections. We also agreed that as to condition number 15, the clause would state, Verizon Wireless shall indemnify, defend, and hold harmless city for all claims related to, connected with, or arising out of the construction, maintenance, operation, repair, alteration, or improvement of the wireless telecommunication facility. So we would ask that that replace condition number 15 as stated in the draft conditions of project approval.
Okay, I think those.
And I just ask, is applicant agreeing to that language? Mr. Albritton, for the record.
Yes, thank you. For the record, we did agree to that language.
Thank you.
I'll try crafting a motion. Chair?
Do we need some definition of an increase in power to trigger condition 16?
That would depend on the maker of the motion, I think.
Okay.
Okay, well, I will move that for the approval of Resolution 2020 that pertains to site number 006 with the modifications to the conditions 4, A through J as enumerated by the city attorney, condition 8, condition 15, and condition 16. With condition 16, I believe, is the one that would, condition 16. And then in addition to specify, I'm not sure what to recommend on a power increase. I don't know what is a material power increase. And certainly we've clarified, I'm sorry that this is now making the motion complicated, but we've already clarified that a material change in the appearance of these towers in the future would be subject to review and approval. So what I would ask our consultant, what would be an appropriate power level increase subject to, new condition?
Well, the current requested power, effective radiating power for the entire facility is 440 watts, okay? So I would suggest something in the range of 25 to 50% above that, if you ask me for what I think is a material change.
Okay, then I would suggest our language be a power increase exceeding 25%.
So, Mr. Chair, if I can, I'd like to just clarify that condition number 8 was as presented by staff.
Yes.
And then the number 16 would be words to the effect of, should the applicant choose to utilize new technology to increase power greater than 25% of the applicant's proposal, that a use permit amendment or a use permit modification shall be required.
Yes.
So we have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second. And I'd just like to clarify for the record that the changes to conditions 8 and 4, 8, and 15 were as described by staff.
Yes.
Yeah.
Do we have any further discussion? Not? Roll call vote, please.
Mr. Chair?
Oh, just a minute.
Sorry.
Yeah, my microphone's off. I'm sorry, Mr. Chair. Mr. Afflerbach was just telling me that the language effective radiating should go before power in the condition number 16.
Okay.
That's acceptable.
Okay.
Yes.
So let's have a roll call vote, please.
Commissioner Kelso Barnett.
Aye.
Commissioner Wellander.
No.
Commissioner Barbos.
Yes.
Commissioner Larry Barnett.
Aye.
And Chair Felder.
Aye.
Motion is approved 4 to 1.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, if I could make just a couple of comments. There is an appeal period of 15 days for either the applicant or a member of the public that would choose to appeal the decision on this particular use permit. And then secondly, just as a point of order, you may choose to hear item 007 because we don't have.
Right, I was going to suggest that we adhere to the original agenda order.
Thank you.
But we will take about a 3-minute break. I'd like to reconvene the meeting, please. let's move on to item 5.2 then. We will preserve the original order of the agenda.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I'm going to need a couple of minutes to get the computer up and going for the item.
Okay. While you do that, I'm going to make a couple of introductory remarks. Since the next two items are very similar to what we've just discussed, I would like to ask everyone, both staff, commissioners, and the public to please try to confine your remarks to the specifics of the different location as opposed to the general topic of small cell towers, so that we can get through this thing without having to continue to another date or whatever. Let's try to get it done tonight. So, yeah, it's so with that, we will have item 5.2, which is the discussion, consideration, and possible action to approve application site 007, which is a use permit to allow a wireless telecommunication facility and a new street light pole to be located on the east side of 2nd Street West, approximately 150 feet south of West Napa Street, near 550 2nd Street West. Categorically exempt, and with that, staff report, please.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I'm unable to access the internet in order to be able to show the presentation, so I'll just make it brief in the staff report and rely on the applicant to show his simulation photographs. Site 007 is a location on 2nd Street West, south of Napa Street, adjacent to the Union 76.
The one on the screen is from...
It's from the early one, yes. So we'll just take care of that problem right there. But it's the same kind of tower, so yeah, if you don't mind, Mark, that'd be great. Thank you. The proposal again is for the same size tower, the same kind of equipment as a CommScope 2-foot radio, again with a service disconnect. The only difference with this particular site is there is no adjacent signage nearby that communicates parking, speeding, or anything like that. So we have actually introduced a condition that would provide a sign to the satisfaction of the Public Works Director to communicate whatever the Director would choose. The applicant has agreed to that, and correspondence is an attachment 6. We have provided the same findings in a resolution with similar conditions. Staff would recommend that the conditions that you used on application 006 would be replicated in a resolution for this particular site. This concludes staff's presentation.
Thank
and
you.
If you have any questions about the site, you can see here. This is the first one on the left, the picture on the left, and thank you, Mark, is looking in the southeast direction towards the Best Western Sonoma Valley Inn. And you can see where the service disconnect switch has been placed at about 8 feet above grade, along with the radio just south of the antenna. This concludes staff's presentation.
Thank you. Questions of staff? Applicant?
Hi, Mark Peters with the CBR Group, representing Verizon. I'll be brief. We relocated this from the location near Pharmaca from feedback from you and staff. We worked pretty diligently to make sure we didn't have a similar problem with Pharmaca. We spoke with the 76 owner. We spoke with the ownership of the Sonoma Valley Inn. We spoke with the ownership of we spoke with the corporate, the local manager who reached out to corporate for the bank. We received no objections from those business owners. And in addition, the 76 owner was, I'm not sure if it's amenable is the correct word, but is considerate of removing the additional street light, which would become redundant. That's the older one that's adjacent to it right there, which would be an improvement. We don't have that in the photo sim because it hasn't been, fully negotiated, but they seemed inclined to do so to clean up their property as well. And with that, I'd like to turn over to Paul Albright for a moment.
Thank you for all your time this evening. I'll be very brief. I just wanted to remind you, if I could, of our vaulting analysis that we did present to you a year ago. where we showed that because it's a radio, it's been designed to be passively cooled, and that's why there are no fans involved. If we put it in a vault, it needs to have fans, it needs to have vents, it's going to make noise. It also has to have pumps, sump pumps that are connected to the stormwater system in order to de-water it. And we seriously believe that that creates more aesthetic impacts, particularly in terms of the beginning of the construction, the pit that we have to cut, that we have to close the sidewalk whenever we maintain the radio, and we have to create space for a workman to get down to the radio. And frankly, there is no vault created. That Verizon Wireless has one vault that they've been using for their radios. It's 5x8, requires 11x10 excavation, as we showed you earlier. There is no vault that's been designed for this. And I just would like to follow on one of the commissioner's comments that we really believe that this is the preferred aesthetic solution rather than digging up the streets. And as the radios do become combined with the antennas, this vault will become obsolete in the future. And I think that's important for another point that was made about precedence. You do have other carriers who will be coming into town. I think if you have this kind of precedent of this sleek kind of design with a sleek single radio on a light standard, that is going to create a precedence for other carriers. Our original applications, you'll recall, were on utility poles, on PG&E poles, which is a lot cheaper and a lot more useful for us. And we've come a long way. And so I think creating that kind of feasible precedence will serve the community well. It's similar to our pattern in Napa. Other communities who've held firm and given us infeasible conditions, we've had to move forward and pursue litigation, and we've ended up in towns like San Bruno and Danville with approvals of telephone pole facilities. So I encourage you to consider that. I'll stop speaking, but we would really like you to consider the aesthetic impacts of the vaulting. Thank you.
Okay, no questions to the applicant. If the public would care to speak on this item, I'll open the public hearing.
I'm just going to read my computer.
My name is Mark Marthaler, Sonoma, California. I had this idea as a proposed comment, and I didn't want to use it, but it's just really insulting when these guys, nobody particular that I'm referring to in person, but let's just say Verizon comes into the town and tries to make this presentation like they're just trying to help out, and they talk to everybody. They and this 007, they go to a couple chosen businesses. They leave out all the other businesses. And part one of my presentation outlining all the businesses that don't want this around, well, they leave that conveniently out. They say they've been working for a couple of years trying to get the best designs, this and that. I was looking up words to try to maybe come up with a new marketing slogan for Verizon. They come into town, they move the locations around, they don't tell anybody, nobody gets any notices. They're scaring women and children, or women basically. The children get scared. They're scaring women. They're scaring people. Nobody wants this stuff. A person who harasses or persecutes someone with unwanted and obsessive attention, a person who hunts game stealthily. They just keep looking for different locations stealthily. They're not telling anybody what's going on. That's stalker. Behaving, done, or made in a cautious and surreptitious manner so as not to be seen or heard. Again, it's the same stuff. That's stealthy. Causing an unpleasant feeling of fear or unease, and that's what they're doing to the people. That's creepy. So all those words seem to be appropriate, and you can check them off the list, which is really great for this visual that I'm going to show you next, because it really works with the current Verizon logo. It's a 3-word, creepy, stealthy, stalker. And I'm just going to hold it here so I can talk to you further, and I'll get it out of the way. 007, Yeah, there's lots of people that are concerned, and it's hard to get people to show up just because it's a scary topic. Provided they've looked for the best designs, best locations. My notes are too scrambled, but that's my main point. It just makes me upset that they just think like they're doing all they can for our town. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark.
Hello again, Lynn Marie DeVincent. I'm going to just do some random comments also. I think that the complexity of this issue is such that for every person who does show up here is like worth 100, because this is so challenging. I mean, it's challenging for you guys. So I think that the comment about how the only people come who are people are objecting. I've been doing the community outreach for 2 years, and I have yet to meet anyone who wants these cell towers, especially not next to their home or business. I also wanted to comment on the town of Seaside, which recently the council denied Verizon's appeal, and they were at it for 4 years. So every time I say, oh, we've been doing this for 2 years, oh, I'm sorry. Other cities have held them off longer. I also wanted to say, emphasize Mark's work that he did collecting the names of 32 businesses, and that was almost all the owners, and I was with him talking to them and to the employees, and the way majority, all of them are opposed to these towers. I just also wanted to mention that the 4G to 5G thing, I'm really glad that that got brought up. I think that that is a significant thing to consider, and that in places like Sacramento where the 5G already went in, because as Sabina mentioned in her comment, they didn't have folks like Mark and I and Shelley to wave the caution flags, and they got blindsided, and now they're having study sessions at the councils to try to do damage control. But there was a presentation from an entire family who moved out of their home because after the 5G tower went in, they all got sick. They hired an independent tester who told them whatever the radiation exposure was. And, maybe it doesn't matter. I mean, the science and math, is this sort of ephemeral thing. Larry could better articulate it, but one radiation exposure to me might give me cancer and somebody else not. Just like, why does one person get the flu? So, you can't just like have this basic radiation exposure level that is going to be fine. Anyway, I'm rambling a little bit. Sorry. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else care to speak?
Will Ackley, Pioneerburg, California. As far as FCC compliance goes and my trust in them, FDA, all of our regulatory commissions, having worked in the trades for a lifetime, our homes are sick. The materials that have been okayed along the line, asbestos, I don't need to go into what that causes. Insulation in the attic, it's considered a toxic material. Everything down the line, corporations had okayed, put into use, and all of our homes are sick now. So my point being, where do we draw the line? We've got these new things to consider, and there's backing as to the danger of it, and I'm just short and quick here. Where do we draw the line on this stuff? And I appreciate you guys looking out for our best interest. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else care to speak? Seeing none, I'm going to close the public comment, bring it back to the commission for further discussion and possible action.
I move that we approve this permit with all of the same conditions that we just approved the previous permit we discussed. So would it be all the same modifications to the conditions, and would definitely include undergrounding the vault?
A second.
Roll call vote, please. Oh, do you want to have discussion? Sorry.
If I could direct a question to staff, I believe I heard in the presentation by the applicant, or may have was staff, that that existing light standard at the 76th station, there is the desire, the intent, or the agreement that that's going to disappear?
We heard that certainly from the applicant, but it's not a condition of approval of this use permit.
I believe less is more, and I'd like to suggest we add it.
Fine with the modification.
I second that as well.
The only question that arises is who owns that light standard? It looks to me like it's on the gas station property.
Marie
Lambert.
So someone's going to have to agree to remove it. So I don't know if we can make it a condition if it's the
Unless
responsibility of the
Verizon is
property
willing to
owner.
accept the cost of removing it.
I don't think the issue is of cost, and I think that we would accept the cost of it. I think the issue that we would have right now, why we would ask that it not be a condition, is because, you know, we've had but just a preliminary, you know, request about it because we know that it's something that could be removed. We don't have a guarantee, and we would not want to tie our project to the whims of a private property owner adjacent to the project. I can say that we will do all that we can to encourage and we want the project to look as good as possible. It's in our interest to do so within your community, and we will make every effort to, you know, encourage the property owner to to allow us to do that.
Could we potentially add some language that should the existing light standard not be removed, that the light fixture on this, associated with this particular application, not be included on the pole?
I don't think that fixture works. I think it's truly a timepiece.
I was going to suggest that we would accept the condition if it was conditioned upon the property owner's consent.
That's a great idea.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you, Paul.
Okay, so any further discussion?
Well, so modification to include removal of the light pole subject to the property owner's agreement.
Yeah, and that's the good way to do it, because you're basically delegating or giving a third party the ability to impose a condition that may prevent a problem here. So if the property owner, for example, does not give consent, they can still move forward with the application.
Right.
And I just wanted to make a brief comment that of this particular tower, I believe, started north of 7-Eleven and then moved toward Pharmaca, and I do think this is the best site for this tower, and I just wanted to appreciate the company for moving it from the last location near St. Francis and Pharmaca.
Further discussion? Roll call vote, please.
Commissioner Kelso Barnett.
Aye.
Commissioner Willander.
No.
Commissioner Barbose.
Yes.
Commissioner Larry Barnett.
Aye.
And Chair Felder.
Aye.
The motion is approved 4-1.
Mr. Chair, if I can just make a point of clarification, that would be a new condition number 16 that would have related to the removal of the off-site poles. 17, I'm sorry.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you.
Moving right along, we're on item 5.3, which is the discussion, consideration, possible action to approve application for Site 012, use permit to allow a wireless telecommunications facility on a new street light pole to be located on the south side of McDonald Street between First Street West and Broadway near 25 McDonald Street. And this project is also categorically exempt. And with that, staff report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, this application is for a use permit on the south side of McDonald between First Street West and Broadway. The design is the same, basically using a 33-foot street light with luminaire and with an antenna, as we've described previously, with the external location of a radio. The applicant has agreed to relocate signage and remove an existing pole sign. We've placed conditions of approval in the resolution. The staff report is basically identical, other than the fact that there would be the removal of the pole. And as we've described in attachment 6, the applicant has consented to removing the pole and also placing signage to the new street light. Staff's recommendation is to approve the resolution with the findings and conditions attached as outlined in the staff report, and we'd also recommend that you include conditions 1 through 17 as amended tonight for the previous 2 applications. This concludes staff's report. Well, it'd be 1 through 16, excuse me, yeah. This concludes staff's presentation.
I think it is 17 because 16 was the one related to the 25% power increase. So
it's
existing light standard.
yeah, we have a condition 17.
yeah, and so the 17 one would be remove the light subject to the power,
Yeah.
the property owner's concession
Yeah.
or consent. Yeah.
It was. So this one, we don't have that, so we don't.
Right.
All right. Questions of staff? Seeing none, applicant?
Nothing really to add for the sake of expediency, unless you have any questions.
Seeing none. Thank you. Public care to speak?
Still want to promote my idea, just in case some executive at Verizon and the design department would like to take me up on it. Been 2 years working on this, and I haven't been paid for a minute of it, so I could use a job. Decorative design expert. Mark Marthaler, Sonoma, California. This is a great one. 012. And so in it, this location was chosen, and because it's they're hold on, where is it? This is especially critical to add lighting to the sidewalks and driveways of these nearby businesses, as these businesses tend to operate at night, such as the dance studio and Pete's Coffee. Please consider there are large trees and a 2-story building that shadow parts of the parking lot, sidewalk, and business entrance. The added lighting will provide more safety for those areas, particularly children who may be attending the dance studio when it is dusk and or dark at night. Well, we went and talked to the dance studio where there are children of all ages, and they didn't know anything about it. So I appreciate Verizon and its representatives going to talk to Best Western and a gas station and whoever else I mentioned. It's a ghost town as far as public outreach goes, and it just adds more insult to this idea that they're really doing all they can. It just clearly, the people are collateral damage to whatever their business objectives are. As far as vaulting goes, if the radios go down in the vault, and because of water or whatever problem there is, and the service goes out, or if there's a problem in coverage, well, I don't know that that's even a problem, because everybody we talk to says that the coverage is pretty good as it is. And I think that'll be my final point. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Hi, thanks again, Lynn Marie DeVincent. I just wanted to touch on the vaulting a little bit because it seems to me that with the wireless devices that are being sold, the remote control robots, drones that can pinpoint a person and obliterate them, that Verizon can find a way to make vaulting work. I think that it is what has to happen for the future, considering the fire dangers. You know, they talk about these things, the coverage being important for the service, but when these poles go over and it's 70-mile-an-hour wind with those volatile radios or whatever, and the smart meter, which is volatile, that's making it worse. And so I just wanted to mention that. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn. Anyone else? Seeing no one from the public, I'm going to close the public portion of this item and bring it back to the commission for discussion.
Before a motion is made, I didn't have a chance, or did I remember in the last 007, I'm not supportive of putting up unnecessary signs to cover up a disconnect switch. I think that a proliferation of signs, if they're not needed, add just visual clutter. And I think that right now, from my interpretation of what that disconnect switch looks like in profile, I don't think we're improving the aesthetic by putting up a sign that isn't really mandatory, and that goes for actually 03 and 07 total. So I'm just saying, if we don't need a sign, I would rather not have unnecessary signs. That was my 2 cents.
Mr. Chair, if I can just add to the comment, I'm sorry, do you want to go ahead? I was just going to say the application of 07 is placing a net new sign to hide the disconnect, whereas 06 was just taking existing signage and removing a pole, whereas on 012, this will be doing the same thing as 06, where you're going to be removing a pole with a sign on it and getting that signage that's on that pole located on the streetlight sign. So if the commission is of the general opinion, as Commissioner Wellender said, we could reopen 07 to change that condition. And
Well,
act
wasn't it
accordingly.
at the discretion of Public Works anyway, as to what sign they would want to put there? If they don't have a sign to put there, then we don't have to put one.
That could be true, yes.
Just while we're on the question of this switch, I should have asked it earlier, and I think it came up at a previous hearing. Am I correct that these cutoff switches require a key or a lock, or somehow they're not accessible? If somebody got a ladder and went up there and wanted to throw the switch, they couldn't do it, right?
Correct. They are padlocked, and I did have that conversation with PG&E that we do have local discretion, and I've communicated with the applicant that we have discretion to determine the size of the box as long as it accomplishes the features that PG&E require, and locking is part of that.
Thank you.
Okay, if there's no further discussion, I'm looking for a motion.
I will move for the approval of Resolution 2020 pertaining to site number 012 with all the modifications and the changes in the conditions of approval reflected in the previous items and as enumerated by staff.
Second.
Mr. Chair, can we just, point of clarification, we can just specify that that's condition number 4, 8, and I believe 15?
Sure, and that includes 4, A through J, 8, 15, and 16.
Thank you.
Second.
Roll call vote, please.
Commissioner Kelso Barnett.
Aye.
Commissioner Willander.
No.
Commissioner Barbos.
Yes.
Commissioner Larry Barnett.
Aye.
And Chair Felder.
Yes.
The motion is approved 4-1.
Okay, thank you. With that, we will move on to issues update.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, just 2 things very quickly. I believe that Christina has coordinated with those of you that want to make it to the Sonoma State Shindig on a Saturday, February the 1st. That'll be a plan. And then secondly, please remember that, for your calendars that this next coming Monday, you'll have a joint session meeting with the City Council at 6 o'clock at the Vintage House to discuss the general plan, UGB, housing element, and those kind of things.
Are we going to be getting any kind of agenda or meeting packet for that?
Well, if you'd have been looking at your iPads at 5 o'clock tonight, Commissioner Bob, yeah, we just published today. Thank you.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
But I turn it on tomorrow, it'll be there.
Yes, they're actually, yeah, I just checked it while we were talking. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. I'm just looking at, I don't see it in my upcoming agenda thing, which is right here. Okay.
Did you refresh it?
I don't know. Maybe because I'm not on the, the Wi-Fi is not working here, is that it?
No, it is.
No, I had a frozen laptop earlier tonight.
Borrow Blank's iPad?
But it takes forever to download these agendas.
Oh, I'm not going to try to download it. Oh, there it is.
I don't know why.
Yeah, I know. I just turn it on to download, and then I go do something, come back.
There's a little thing there for refresh.
That's a little.
Yeah, all right, so that's it for you. So comments from the commission.
I have a comment. So a couple weeks ago, we discussed the generators at MacArthur Place, and I remember a major component of that discussion was it had to comply with the city noise ordinance. And then like a day later, we find out that the city council may loosen the noise ordinance. Was that ever discussed or brought forward to? I mean, I just at the time remember thinking it would have been helpful to have known that during the discussion. Not that it would have changed anything, but
It'll be coming back to your commission. They basically just gave general direction to staff to start the process.
okay.
Where did that initiative come from?
I believe a combination of things. We've been seeing that from other jurisdictions. In fact, I was on the phone as some of you were arriving tonight with the planning director at Mill Valley. He was returning my call. And they were one of the first jurisdictions to adopt a resolution or an ordinance modification prior to the PSPSs that we had. And we had that brought up at the city council in response to residents and businesses having had the PSPSs this last fall. And so we brought it forward to the council. They gave direction to have that process looked at rather than an urgency ordinance, but to go through and have it go through the planning commission, then a recommendation be provided.
It was to loosen it up or to increase the threshold?
Well, it was to look at the impacts of portable generators and permanent generators, and then also to look at the impact of what would happen if we did provide exemptions, for example, like Mill Valley did, for commercial operators to go ahead and just violate at will the noise standards during the event.
So we're not talking about the sound ordinance across town on all noise. We're just talking about specific
Generators during a PSPS
Emergency
event.
events. And I,
Comment. I just want to say that I was pleased to see the changes that Hop Monk made in its tent. It to me is a good indicator for setting the stage for the discussion we're going to have in the future about it, because clearly you can see the difference that thoughtfulness makes in the ultimate appearance of something. So.
And without violating the Brown Act, though, I'd love to throw out for my fellow commissioners, too. As I was en route here, going by a certain corner restaurant that also has a tent that has not come before us, but I noted how it was integrated much more, in my opinion, effectively. So to me, that's kind of the, if we're going to have a new ordinance, that's the kind of subtleness that I certainly would support, rather than thinking that the Barnum and Bailey is scattered all around town.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, if I can pick up on Commissioner Barbosa's, Barnett's comment about the tent concept. In the staff report, the observant of you will notice that I put the word temporary tents in a suggested list of things that need to be modified in the municipal code or development code. My list that I put in the staff report that you'll see is not exhaustive, but clearly this will be an opportunity for the commission to provide direction to the council on where staff's attention and focus should be as we try to amend the development code.
okay, and I just want a final comment that I want to thank staff for all of the hard work that you did for this. This was a very complex issue, and we appreciate the information that you provided us, and I think it came to the only conclusion that we could probably have reached, but we'll see where it goes from here. So with that, I'll look for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.